Rita Dove is one of America's great contemporary lyric poets. She won the Pulitzer Prize in 1987 for a collection of verse, Thomas and Beulah. From 1993 to 1995, she served as U.S. Poet Laureate, the youngest ever to hold that position. She's recently completed a new book of poems, On the Bus with Rosa Parks, and I am pleased to have her here with us today. Welcome back.
Thank
Great
you.
to see you.
It's great to be here.
On the Bus with Rosa Parks. Everybody knows who Rosa Parks was. If there's a pantheon of great civil rights heroes and heroines, she's at the very top.
That's true. That's right.
She was the person who said, I'm not sitting in the back of this bus.
Mm-hmm. And that moment changed so much in history.
Yeah.
And it was that moment that intrigued me, the fact that at that moment something changed perceptibly in our whole appreciation of civil rights and how that worked. And so it was a poetic moment. And that's how the book got started.
Now, have you been thinking about this and at some point knowing that you want to do it, or did something spur your mind to do it at this time?
Actually, what spurred my mind was a comment that my daughter made a few years ago. She was about 12 at that time, so about 4 years ago. We were at a conference where Rosa Parks was also present, and we were being ferried about on buses to various sites. And one morning we got on a bus to go to the conference center, and our daughter leaned over to my husband and myself and said, "We're on the bus with Rosa Parks." And it was just all of that, the excitement, the fact that we were on the bus, and that crystallized it around the title, actually. Yeah.
See, that's so great. I mean, she knew, she was 12 years old, she knew who Rosa Parks was, and she was excited because...
And she knew the significance of all of this.
On the bus and all of that.
Yeah, so that got me started about thinking about how Rosa Parks has just permeated all of our consciousnesses. As you said, if there is someone in the pantheon of great leaders, then it's Rosa Parks.
She's there, and lives today.
That's right.
In fact, I just saw something, I was telling you, where she was being honored or being given an honorary degree or something in the paper. On the Bus with Rosa Parks, there are other poems here.
Yes.
What other ideas are we expressing?
One of the things that the book tries to express is the notion that one moment you can be quote-unquote nobody. You can be an ordinary person. You can be someone who is not going to be in the history books. And the next moment you can do something heroic. Whether it's recognized by history or not is a moot point. But it's the idea that all of us do heroic acts every day. Sometimes simply by surviving, simply by doing something with grace or with courage. So that there are poems in the book which, there's a poem about an old woman who walks the mall every morning and says, "I'm not giving up on my life." I mean, to me, that is an act of courage. And then there are poems, the whole section to deal with Rosa Parks deals not only with Rosa Parks as a symbol, but also the fact that she allows us to admire her, that she allows herself to be a symbol, recognizing that we do need role models. We do need people to look up to give us courage, to make us feel that we can do the impossible too. So the book is often about those forgotten small moments in our lives which matter intensely to us, which help define us as human beings.
I want to talk about writing poetry, but read, if you will, page 83, which is one of the poems here, simply entitled Rosa.
Yes. This poem is a poem about that moment. I think many of us have seen that marvelous photograph of Rosa Parks frozen sitting there at the bus, but this is about that moment. Rosa, how she sat there, the time right, inside a place so wrong it was ready. That trim name with its dream of a bench to rest on, her sensible coat. Doing nothing was the doing, the clean flame of her gaze carved by a camera flash. How she stood up when they bent down to retrieve her purse. That courtesy. It's such a quiet moment to have made such a big noise, let's say, in history. It's such a quiet moment.
Such a consequential moment.
Absolutely.
Quiet in its origin.
Quiet in its origin, and the way she embodied the moment, the way doing nothing was really what happened. She refused to get up, and yet the way she embodied it was important.
What's the task of the poet?
I'd say that the task, this is a hard question because as soon as you say what the task is, there are 1,000 others that occur, but try to think of something that encompasses everything. I think the task of a poet is to pay attention want to pay attention and to be honest in that paying attention. By that I mean to look at life in all of its contradictions, and this sounds unpoetic, but to report on it honestly. When I say report, I mean to write it down as honestly as you can. Now, the other part of that task is to use the materials. Everyone has a certain métier that you use. The materials that a poet uses are, of course, the language. So you must be absolutely honest to the language, too, to use it in the best way you possibly can. And, yeah, and then that means that nothing is unpoetic. Nothing is too small. Nothing is too ugly or uncomfortable. If it is part of the world and it has engaged the poet's attention, if it has moved someone, then it's worthy of poetry.
In some ways, poetry ought to be the best use of our language.
It should be. The best words in the best order.
In the best words in the best order.
In the best order, yes, yes. And it should, because I think that one of the things that we tend to forget about poetry is that because we use language every day, we think of it as just something that everybody bandies about. But poetry takes words and considers not only their meanings, but their sounds, the way they feel in your mouth, the breath it takes to say a line.
After you have the tools to use as a poet, so that people will say, Rita Dove knows how to use the language. What's the hardest part? I mean, what's the struggle?
Every time I sit down to write, it's as if I'm starting over again, tools or no tools, because you try to get back to what you really feel, or what the true emotion is. And I think any extreme emotion, and this is for any art actually, but any extreme emotion is essentially wordless. It's essentially ineffable. It's something that takes your breath away, something that takes your words away. To find the words to imitate that inarticulate state, that's the most difficult thing. So tools or not, I mean, you still end up rather speechless before it. And it depends on the poem, what becomes the sticking point. With the Rosa Parks poems, one of the most difficult things was to honor her without being enamored of the image, but to get behind the whole thing, to get behind the whole significance of either being on the bus with her or not, and to expand it from there. But the essential difficulty is actually simply getting the words on the page so that, in a sense, the words at the end disappear, that you have an emotion when you read it, but aren't aware of each individual word. It's a very tricky thing.
Yeah. Is there heightened interest in poetry today, you think?
Oh, yes.
Why is that?
Well, I think you can't keep a good thing down, first of all. We had heightened interest in poetry in the 60s, and then I think the whole country went into a 15 years of selfishness or something. We kind of pulled into ourselves. But I do believe that people are hungry for connections that go beyond the surface level, that they are really hungry for kind of soul-to-soul communication, and the arts give you that. And poetry was popping up by the beginning of the 90s already. We have poetry slams, you have poetry in cafes, you've got National Poetry Month now, we have more books being published than ever. When I was Poet Laureate, people wrote me letters. Ordinary people, they didn't want anything. They just wanted to tell me about their first experience with poetry. Right. And then I realized how hungry people are to simply communicate. And poetry does it better than anything else.
Here's what Helen Vendler said in The New Yorker. Rita Dove's laser glance exposes and cauterizes its subjects in new and disturbing ways. Thank you for coming.
It was my pleasure.
Pleasure. On the bus with Rosa Parks, Rita Dove. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.